Okay. Thank you, Dan, and thank you for the invitation. Good afternoon. So it's really an honor to be here and to be part of this important conversation about AI and implications on education. And I really enjoy some of my earlier conversations with my colleagues and broadly with many professors and faculty members in different disciplines. And again, my name is Weimao, and or you can call me John. So I'm a faculty member of Drexel University and in the Information Science Department. It's also part of the College of Computing and Informatics. And as Dan introduced, my focus is in information retrieval and distributed intelligence systems, particularly with the focus on search analytics, and the integration of machine learning and artificial intelligence to help people find information. So that was my focus. And I first wanted to really present my observation from the world of Google, which is really my research is about, to the world of ChatGPT. So my research in information retrieval or search engine technologies is very much aligned with Google's objective to organize the world's information for easy access. So, this is very much kind of the very notion of like ask and it will be given to you, seek and you will find, right? Knock and the door will be open to you, right? So search engines focus is very much similar, like, type in the search box and the answer will be given to you, at the top of the result page. And that's our focus, right? How can we get that relevant piece of information to the user? And it's the kind of the central focus. But my observation with this very easy access to information also comes with a consequence. From an educator's point of view, there's a tendency for people to skip problem formulation and jump directly to the answer or possible solutions because it's so easy to just type in a few keywords and get the answer that you were looking for, right? So for those of you who perhaps remember the time where in the library we still had this physical space of the library catalog, right? And catalog cards. It was a very different world. It was very much challenging to find information back then, but that kind of did necessitate, the process, like to really think about your problem, your question, right? And then formulate your information need, and then be able to understand the subject headings in the library, and then be able to follow the catalog system to find the answer that you were looking for, be it a book or a journal article that may be of your interest. So, this world is very different because it's so easy. So students and regular users alike, we tend to skip that step and to conceptualize. And so I think from the learning point of view, this is a big problem, right? So technology in this sense has not only changed the way we access information, but it actually also changed the way we think. And so now let's fast forward to ChatGPT, which was released last November. So this has about been a year. And I just also noticed from that the CEO was also fired from the company that he started. But anyway, this technology shocked the world, right? And I think everyone was amazed, including us who are in the tech world. This is something that was unheard of and was a surprise. And it certainly raised lots of excitement, but also concerns as well. I mean, it led to really new waves of development in AI and virtually a new race in AI models. So in my research, I have studied and tracked the technology for years. And there are, in fact, two pieces of technologies here that we are talking about. Because in ChatGPT, there's a GPT and there's Chat. So GPT is nothing new, which is the generative pre-trained transformer architecture. And that architecture also has two pieces of development. I don't want to get into the technical detail, but there are two pieces of component. One is the development of such models to understand languages and their structure. And so that enables the association of symbols and words and the meaning of words in context. And that is what we refer to as, the word embedding. And the other is the transformer architecture. And that was essentially the knowledge representation. If you think about what GPT is to be pre-trained with lots of data. Public data, can be private data, but any kind of data with human languages. And so that the model will be able to, under the language structure, and actually be able to speak the language. And also not just the words itself, but what this word actually means in the context of that sequence of tokens. And so there is an important piece of information about knowledge representation. The other piece is chat, which is, I think, what surprised lots of people, even in research. The ability to have conversations with human beings and the ability actually to pass this very important test, the Turing test, right? So because it's really human-like. And so to internalize that knowledge is one thing, but actually to act on that knowledge, to be able to respond to questions and follow instructions is quite the other. And what surprised us is this ability to do that. So this is kind of the behavior piece that OpenAI has pioneered. They spend hundreds of millions in the training to get this behavior right. And so because a couple of years we did not see that capability. And so with this amazing ability of ChatGPT to answer questions and follow instructions, and so you see that, right? I'm sure lots of us have used and this technology and all tested it. So there's some level of logical reasoning and perhaps some level of creativity. Of course, I need to put creativity in quotes because there can be a debate about whether there's a real creativity in it or not. Now, so it's a great tool that understands human language. So among others, it can also assist us in many tasks because of this understanding. This is a hard problem, right? So for education, I think there is a great potential to engage not only students, but educators alike in the teaching and learning. So I'm sure many have started to engage it in one way or the other. It is also possible for us to outsource certain routine tasks, right, to these tools. Tasks that are repetitive, right, and time-consuming, and that can also release us and allow us to focus on perhaps more intellectual and creative aspects of education and learning. And so it's also possible for us to develop more personalized interactive tools to help and engage students in the learning process. So these are the benefits that I see. But there is also a great danger when it comes to misuse and abuse of this technology. And I would like to talk about these two, just to touch on them very briefly. And I refer to them as two hallucination problems. One hallucination I think many people are aware of is that ChatGPT, for example, among other large language models, are very capable of making up things, right? So they can create fake contents that are not factual or contrary to the facts. So, and this is part of the nature by design because these are generative models, right? The G is for generation. So it's trying to replicate data from its training and recreate things. And so in that process of recreating or generating content, it's possible and very possible to generate fake content. But so this itself is a very technical, challenging issue, but still it's a problem that I think can be mitigated and even if not totally eliminated in future research. So I'm positive about that. The other hallucination, or I should say misconception, is more on the human side. And I think to some degree it's spiritual too, because there is, in my understanding of our faith as Catholic Christian, is that there's confusion or hallucination or misconception among people regarding the personhood of such AI tools, right? So I really appreciate our Christian understanding of a person being body and soul, And so in that sense, if I am body and soul, right? So it's not just I'm a body with having a soul, but I'm both. If AI is a person, if we just think about that possibility, right, with consciousness, it entails a whole range of consequences, right, and things that we can do or cannot do with that tool. I mean, if AI is a person, then it entails that it has free will, right? It can make decisions. It can take responsibility. It can be held responsible for things that it does, right? If not, then it cannot do that. And so there are lots of consequences or even legal consequences that such tools should have. And so in that case, they will also be capable of real love and suffering, if there is a possibility, right? And having a relation with an AI tool then will become possible. But that is where my faith and my understanding in our faith comes in, and I don't think, there is a personhood in such AI tools. But there is a great danger in there if people have this misconception, and I want to use some, words from John Paul II in his encyclical on the Evangelium Vitae, or the Gospel of Life. I think it's important for us to remember the Lord's calling for us to a fullness of life far exceeding the dimensions of our earthly existence. Science and technology are here at the service of humanity, and I think citing the words of John Paul II, I think instead of technology freeing man is at the danger of being enslaving himself to it. So we want to use technology for the service of humans, and we want to stay true to that. So again, and I want to quote what Jesus said, "If you remain in my word, you will truly be my disciples. You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And I believe the same holds true for education, that technology can be used to serve students and free their thoughts and enrich their learning experiences. But it also requires education and discernment to understand the best approach to it. So this would be my remark. Maybe I go over time, but
Perfect. No, thank you.
So I will look forward to more conversations with everyone.
Thanks, Professor T. Professor Richards.
Sure. Keep an eye on my time here. Thank you for inviting me, and I was delighted to see that Weimao was on the docket for today, because I am a complete Luddite when it comes to technology. And so I think it's perhaps the want of many philosophers to be so, but to have someone with the expertise and the technical side who engages with hopefulness to balance my innate pessimism on the issue is probably a good thing. I also want to throw a shout out to my colleague, Dr. Burke Ray, who has led who couldn't be here today, but he has led Eastern's response to this in important ways, and I've learned a lot from him on this question. So ChatGPT, in one sense, with this question in particular, and the ways it's getting used in education, in some sense, there's nothing new under the sun, I think, right? So when I was in graduate school, we were concerned about students turning their questions for their papers over to paper mills and having somebody else write them for them and then get them back. And in essence, right, ChatGPT functions as a really quick paper mill. It's really fast and it's free, but it functions in the same way if you're trying to use it for cheating purposes, right? If you're trying to use it to avoid doing the assignment yourself. Somebody else will do it for you and you can just fill it in. What is new is that it is immediate, it's free, it's flexible, and it's drawing on a lot more data. And it's not connected to a particular human mind, right? And I think that's actually a really important difference. So I do have concerns about the fake data, right? But again, maybe that can be mitigated even at the kind of highest levels of society. My husband was working in a court this summer, and he said that some lawyers got caught using ChatGPT to write their briefs for them, and they were caught because the reference that ChatGPT drops didn't actually exist. It referred to a case that it itself had made up. and this is in federal court. So, don't do that. Right. It's all up and down the ladder. But my main concern when it comes to these kinds of tools, when it comes to AI tools, is that they undermine our own experience of education, and therefore thereby they can undermine the end or the telos or the purpose of education. Right? And I'm glad you used this word outsource, because that's where you might call my remarks a meditation on outsourcing, right? What can be fruitfully outsourced and what cannot in terms of attaining the purpose of education. So education, to my mind, is about shaping our attention, right? When we outsource, we are having someone else attend for us, right? We're saying, you attend to this so I could attend to something else, right? Whether that be a more creative pursuit because you're attending to the kind of minutia or the kind of frustrating and routine parts, or whether that be you attend to my schoolwork so that I can attend to my video game, right? These are both forms of outsourcing of attention, right? There are places where this is necessary, right? And we can talk about what those are, right? I can't be an expert in everything, and I am grateful that there are experts in things that I'm not an expert in, right? I am grateful that Dr. K, is an expert in what he's an expert in, right? And we can have this kind of synergy there. But there are things that we cannot outsource, right? Namely our own conducting of our own lives. This cannot be fruitfully outsourced, and we have to do it. Nobody else can do it for us. And part of what education is for, in fact, I would say the main thing that especially kind of K through 12 education is for, maybe we get more specific as we go along, starting in college, is to prepare us to live fully human, adult human lives, right? And so if we're constantly outsourcing pieces of that, right, it's not going to stand us in good stead because nobody's ultimately going to make the decisions of shaping our lives for us. So that's my concern about outsourcing to experts in various ways, right? And ChatGPT can tell you what people have said about something, but it can't tell you what to do. And therefore, it doesn't really address the ultimate question of education, which is how should one live? How should one live, right? You can ask ChatGPT that question, and it'll spit out an answer for you all right. I was going to do that with our question today, but it was down this morning because of this CEO standing. And so we're tempted to do this outsourcing. I think that when we see this as a temptation, we're driven to make, I think it drives us to, or forces us to make an important philosophical distinction. So here we go, here's my disciplinary expertise coming into play. I think the key distinction we need to have in our tool belt here is the distinction between internal and external goods. All right, so what do I mean by that? Here's an internal good. Internal goods are goods that are intrinsic to a practice, right? So an internal good of playing chess, for instance, this is Alistair McIntyre. I'm stealing directly from a book called After Virtue, which is a real book. You can look it up. All right. So the good, intrinsic goods to chess, right? The exercise of strategy, the understanding of the structure of a game and the different techniques of playing it, right? The meeting of another mind across the table, right? These are all goods intrinsic to the practice of chess. You might think of goods intrinsic to, say, playing an instrument, right? My daughter's learning how to play guitar, right? And it turns out that you don't automatically sound like the players that you listen to, right? You don't automatically sound like the musicians to whom you've listened. You have to engage in that practice in order to be able to do it for yourself. And there are goods intrinsic to that, right, that are not skippable, right? There are goods intrinsic to the practice of learning how to make music for yourself, right? The making of music is the good. You making music, not somebody else. Yeah? All right. Then there are external goods, right? External goods are rewards and punishments for achieving or failing to achieve something. Right, external goods, right? If you practice chess, right, if you play a game of chess with me, I'll give you a piece of candy. I'll let you watch a movie, right? If you practice your guitar, I will let you, right, have this other thing that you might want, right? You see how candy has nothing to do with guitar playing? Yeah. That's an external good that I might use to bribe my child to do what I would like it to do. There's also punishments that go along with it, right? You will lose the tournament, right? Even winning the chess tournament is not actually an internal good of chess, right? You will you will be really embarrassed in front of your guitar teacher when he sees that you have made negative practice from your lesson last week, right? It's an external thing, right? The shame of failing is not about the practice itself. All right. So how does this distinction between internal and external goods relate to education? That's our topic for today, right? So we need to ask ourselves these two questions. One, what are the goods intrinsic to education, right? What is the point? And I think one thing that ChatGPT has done is forced educators to ask that question anew. And in that sense, I think it's a really good thing, right? We need to be asking this question all the time, but sometimes we just get so stuck in our routines of how we've been doing things that we stop and don't stop to ask that question. So number one, what are the goods intrinsic to education? And number two, is how we are practicing education actually getting at them? Or are we training our students to chase external goods? All right, so what are the goods intrinsic to education? All right, well, I would say when we're talking about K through 12 education, I think we have to talk about liberal education, right? I think we have to talk about educating ourselves as full human persons, right? In the sense of evangelism vitae that was mentioned earlier, right? We are training ourselves to love God with our minds. We are training ourselves. Why do you call it liberal education, right? This is not this is not the kind of liberal conservative dichotomy, right? This is liberal education in terms of education for free persons, right? Rather than education in a particular technical skill, right? That's the contrast we're going for here. So I don't mean liberal in the sense that we often throw the term around. Goods intrinsic to education, developing the ability to discern true from false goods, right? Telling yourself, responding for yourself, this question of how should I live, right? These are goods intrinsic to education. Here are some goods that are extrinsic to education. Grades, money, prestige, right? When I ask my college students why they do school, they automatically tell me to get a good job, right? That's what education is for. And then we try to unlearn that. Before relearning it, right? So no one is saying that being able to make a living isn't an important thing, right? But it's not the only important thing, right? And knowing what you should do to make a living, how you should go about making a living, what you will and won't do in order to make that living, right? Are questions that technical education cannot answer for you. And they're certainly questions that ChatGPT can't answer for you, right? Our education is supposed to be helping us, forming us in the virtues so that we can live these kind of flourishing adult human lives. So the question for the educators is, are we training people in the liberal arts in these things, or are we instead creating, to quote the title of a recent book, excellent sheep, right? Who are really, really good at certain skills, but are not good at thinking for themselves, are not good at synthesizing input from multiple different areas and making their own way forward. Aristotle calls this practical wisdom. Right? Prudence is sometimes the translation we get in the Catholic world. This is what we need to be doing. And so I think what certain uses of ChatGPT encourage us to do is to pursue extrinsic goods by skipping the intrinsic goods. Right? I want the grade, but I'm going to skip the process. Right? I don't trust myself to be able to do the process, or I just don't want to do the process. I just want that external good. I want that rubber stamp of the grade to get to the next step. But what we're not seeing necessarily is that we've skipped the thing itself. Right? We've skipped the education. And so what do we do? Right? That's, now that I'm out of time, I'm going to talk about what we should do. I'm going to take an extra 2 minutes of your time without even asking. All right. So what should we do as teachers, as leaders of schools, as students, right? I think prevention through detectors is a losing strategy, right? So you can run everything through Turnitin. Maybe that's a kind of Band-Aid stopgap, right? But in essence, the technology's not going to keep up, right? So just running your existing assignments through an AI detector is not going to address this issue well for long, right? So actually that's a losing strategy. A better strategy, I think, is prevention of its use, or kind of encouraging not to use it through assignment and assessment design, right? In designing assignments to prevent its use, we'll also end up thinking more carefully about the ends of education, right? And that's really helpful, right? That I'm thinking very intentionally about that when I'm designing my assessments. So for instance, I now assign my students more dialogues, right? Right now they're writing a dialogue about if either Thomas Hobbes or John Locke ended up appearing in Martin Luther King's jail cell while he was writing the letter from a Birmingham jail, and they have to write me a dialogue between those two authors about the ends of government. ChatGPT has a lot harder time writing that than writing an essay comparing and contrasting the views of King and Hobbes on government. Right? It can do that latter thing really easily, but creating actual dialogue where you're inhabiting the characters in a convincing way, it's not very good at that yet. Now maybe it'll get there. Maybe that again is a stopgap. Oral exams, right? You can't, right? If you were giving oral exams with open-ended questions, right, that reestablishes the personal relationship between teacher and student, and lets you see in real time whether the student is able to make the synthesis that you're hoping they can make, right? It's not outsourceable in that way. So those are just a couple of examples. There are also ways that we can make our classrooms such that we are demonstrating, here's where I really want to focus, demonstrating the intrinsic goods of education. Are our classrooms places where we practice the intrinsic goods of education together? Are we, say, memorizing a catechism? Some of you might be familiar with the work of Josh Gibbs, right? Such that when we all leave the class, we know a set of poems, or we know a set of kind of call and responses to a certain set of material that become part of us, and the way things become part of us when we memorize them. Are we memorizing scripture together? Are we engaging in the process of writing, and our professors or teachers sharing their own experiences of the intrinsic goods of learning by sharing what they're presently reading? Or by going out in nature together, all of these kinds of things. So I've got a whole list of those that we could go through, but I'm out of time. Another piece, I think, is acknowledging the value of the extrinsic goods, right? Students are rightly concerned about these things, especially when they're being pressured to get into colleges. And us pretending like that's not a real pressure or a real concern is not going to be helpful. Student anxiety in my college students is through the roof. Students are very anxious, at least by the time they get to college. And pretending that's not true is not going to serve us well. But locating the sources of that anxiety and speaking into them instead of just kind of ignoring and asking them to get over it, I think is another piece of this equation. So figuring out how to talk well, how to have good conversations about the relationship between intrinsic and extrinsic goods is another piece of this equation. But I think there's also things to be said about community and family life, which I'm happy to talk about in the Q&A. All right.
Thank